紧接着登场的是专题演讲，邀请毛金如教授为我们主持。
我们这一堂就是如刚刚讲的，我们邀请澳洲Newcastle 大学的Laureate Professor Jennifer Gore， 他在澳洲其实他们有一个 Teaching and Teacher Education 的一个研究中心，然后有关Quality Teaching Rounds， 其实他们进行非常非常多年，然后也是一路走来有一些经验，然后他们有一些成果，也做了很多的分析。那很谢谢欢迎就是我们的Jennifer Gore Professor 来跟大家先分享一下他们过去这几年在澳洲的经验这样子。那应该已经在线上了吗 ？OK。Please welcome Professor Jennifer Gore. Thanks for accepting our invitation to share Australia experience of quality teaching rounds for us. Welcome, Jennifer Gore.
Thanks everyone for having me. It's a real privilege to be here, and especially to meet with an alumna of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I'm going to jump straight in. Very happy to take questions and comments, and I'll certainly leave time at the end for your input. So I think one of the things that I really want to acknowledge is that in Australia, but in many parts of the world, we have a dire teacher shortage. I've been involved in education or higher education for 40 years, and I have never seen a situation like the one that we're currently facing. We also have either declining student results, and there's a lot in our media about how student results are going down. There was a very good paper by Sally Larson published recently that showed that in fact Australia's results are not going down except in PISA. So in PEARLS, in TIMS and in NAPLAN data, students are pretty much holding steady. But it really does depend on the nature of the evidence that's been used there and how it's been analysed. But the reality is that students' results in Australia at least do not seem to be going up. There's a really grave concern about equity, given that we have been talking about equity since at least the 1970s in Australia. The fact that we still have poor results for students from disadvantaged backgrounds, for Indigenous students, for rural students, really is to some extent something I guess that we really need to do something about. And more recently, there's a lot of talk about poor engagement from students and poor behaviour, not only from students, but actually from their parents as well. So that's the context in which we're working. And to address this context, I guess I really want us to think comprehensively about how we understand what is good teaching, how we build teachers' capacities to deliver good teaching, and how we can actually improve outcomes from schooling for all students. And I think at the core of this work is the reality that teachers make a difference, and it's teachers in the end that change what happens in classrooms. We have to be mindful of the context, but I'm very interested in what teachers can do. So if we go first of all to how we understand good teaching, Sally Platfield, a colleague, and I have a chapter coming out in a book later this year where we talk about the importance of how we understand pedagogy. Pedagogy can be foundational to school improvement, we argue, if we recognise both its conceptual and its practical aspects and we tame them. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But what we argue also is that putting pedagogy at the centre of improvement requires deep understanding and acknowledgement of what pedagogy is, and a practical way to honour and reduce its undeniable complexity. In Australia, as in many parts of the world, pedagogy ends up being narrowly understood as a set of teaching skills when it is so much more than the act of teaching. And we also argue in this chapter that teaching ends up being treated, if you like, or fabricated as routinized, mundane and predictable. Teachers primarily go through the motions of giving information and controlling behaviour, so much so that it ends up becoming what teachers do, what students expect, and what parents, the community, and the general public more broadly assume teaching to be. I feel like I should be in this mode. That would be better. My apologies, I've just realized that. Teaching ends up being trivialized, its complexities ignored, and its demands diminished. And I think this is a real problem. If we understand teaching narrowly as a set of skills, we lose sight of the importance of teaching as also conveying the values of a society. It's about not only what we teach, but how and who. And so what we argue is that a focus on pedagogy broadly conceived highlights what unites teachers and builds rather than diminishes teaching as an intellectual enterprise. One of the things we're worried about right now is the number of people who are leaving the profession. And what we are arguing and finding is that if teachers are not treated as professionals engaged in intellectual work, they're more likely to leave. They don't want to just read other people's scripts in front of a class of somewhat disengaged students. We also need to be really mindful of the different traditions of teaching and teacher education. Arguably, there's a disciplinary tradition which effectively says you need to know well whatever you teach. You need great content knowledge. There's a scientific tradition that's really set out to understand what it is about teaching that works in making a difference. There's an experiential tradition that says people learn to teach by watching and by doing and by practicing. And actually, we don't need universities because everyone can learn on the job. And there's a social reconstructionist or critical tradition that says schools must meet their moral imperatives to address equity. What I've argued years ago in this paper is that we need all four traditions simultaneously, and it's possible to care about people's subject knowledge, what we know from the evidence, the value of learning from practitioners, and of course we must attend also to the, if you like, moral demands of our work, that we deliver great teaching for all students. To this end, we developed in 2003, so more than 20 years ago, this thing we call the quality teaching model. It's a comprehensive model of pedagogy that honors the complexity of teaching. It has its origins in Fred Newman's work from the University of Wisconsin-Madison on authentic pedagogy, but other things that we have tried here in Australia. We argue the quality teaching model has three dimensions. There must be high intellectual quality, where we're really trying to help students develop a deep understanding of important knowledge. And those words are very deliberately chosen. It's not just all knowledge, but important knowledge. We must ensure positive classrooms that boost student learning, and we must connect learning to students' lives and the wider world. What we argue is that historically in education, we've done one of these at the expense of the others. We might do highly significant experiential work, but the intellectual quality might not be there. Or we might do intellectual quality with such rigor that students are afraid to make mistakes. And so the quality learning environment isn't there, and so on. We argue that all three dimensions need to be kept high simultaneously in every lesson. To elaborate the three dimensions, we have 6 elements of practice that sit underneath. So in total, this model has 18 elements of practice. What you notice about this is these are not teaching skills like good questioning and giving feedback. These are, if you like, more qualities of a classroom. Students are dealing with important ideas. They're being asked to demonstrate their understanding of those ideas. They're asked to recognise that knowledge is socially constructed, to engage in higher order thinking wherever possible. Not always, of course, lower order thinking is also terribly important. They're asked to break down language and understand how language functions, and they're asked to communicate in substantive ways. We don't just tell students what to do, but we give them quality criteria so they know how well they're expected to do things. We have them highly engaged. We set high expectations that they engage in challenging work. We ensure the environment is safe for students and they feel comfortable in their learning. We ensure that we minimize the amount of time we spend on behavior and maximize the amount of time spent on instruction. And where possible, we let students have some input into the direction over their learning. It's not always relevant. As a former physical education teacher, when we teach the javelin, it's not explore the javelin and see how many ways you can use a javelin. It's stand behind the line and don't move. So these are very adaptable to context. In terms of significance, we try to bring in not only students' prior knowledge, but their prior school knowledge and their out of school knowledge. We bring in non-dominant forms of cultural knowledge. We try to connect across subjects and within subjects so that students are not left to do all that connecting work themselves. We make sure that all students, no matter what their social group, sorry, I didn't mean to click there, are included. We connect their learning to their lives outside of school, and we use stories to help learning come to life. So what this model does is it treats teaching very comprehensively. It deals with how we treat knowledge, how we treat students, and how they treat each other. It deals with behaviour issues, equity issues, and so on. So it's a broad model of pedagogy, and what we're looking for in every lesson is that each dimension is represented highly, not necessarily every element. And I will talk to you about how we've used that in our research in a moment. But what we find is people say things like this. This is the first time in my career I feel I'm actually teaching students. Until now, I've just been giving them work to do. I want to say that that's quite transformative in how this man who'd been teaching for about 20 years understood what it means to teach. I also want to say that we're very agnostic on your approach to teaching. People can use this approach with explicit instruction, with inquiry-oriented learning, with guided discovery, with basically any approach to teaching. And so it doesn't dictate how people teach. It gets people to think about how they're currently teaching and how they could lift the quality of their teaching to deliver better outcomes for students. So if we now go to the second part of my talk and think about professional development for teachers, because we know that professional development is so powerful potentially for getting better outcomes for teachers, or at least changing their practice and therefore getting better results for students. So much money is invested around the world every year in professional development, and while some of it makes a difference, we know that a lot of it doesn't. Our approach to professional development actually intellectually engages teachers in pedagogy through a very clear and specific vision of quality teaching. The model that I just presented, each one of the 18 elements has a 1 to 5 coding scale attached to it. So you can actually produce a number. The numbers are not an end in themselves. The numbers are a means to having powerful conversations among teachers. And those numbers are kept confidential to the group of teachers who are working with them. But what's really important is that it intellectually engages teachers in their work, in thinking about what they're achieving. If you're thinking about how can I lift the intellectual quality, the quality of the learning environment and the significance of these lessons, it doesn't take a lot of extra time at all. But it engages teachers in thinking not just about giving students work to do, but thinking about what they're actually achieving. It also values teachers because it gives them time to critically analyse practice. And what we find is it's invariably affirming for teachers or validating for teachers. Most teachers work in classrooms on their own. And when, with our approach to professional development, they get feedback from colleagues who sit in and watch their lessons, it's really affirming because there's a whole lot that they realise they're doing very well. It also very much builds trust and productive relationships among teachers. And we argue that unless professional development does these things, it's likely to not have the kind of effect we would want for teaching. The approach we use, we call quality teaching rounds. It's an approach that's designed to empower teachers to empower each other. It's a very short process. We basically have teachers come to a 2-day workshop and then they go back to their school. And when I say teachers come to a workshop, it's literally only 2 teachers per school who need to come to a workshop. Those workshops are offered online or face-to-face. They go back to their school and they form a group of 4 teachers to do observations with. So each quality teaching round, that's 1 day, a group of 4 teachers spends 4 days together doing this work. They start with a discussion of a reading, and this is designed to build that shared knowledge base, because teachers read things in common. They have more in common to talk about, and it helps to really build a professional learning community. We don't use professional learning community as a synonym for group. It's about actually being professional and learning together in a really communal way. When I say reading, it can be an academic paper, it can be a professional paper, a news item, it can be a TED talk, a YouTube clip, it can be anything, but it's teachers select these themselves, and they don't have to relate to the lesson. It's just about dealing with some educational knowledge together. They then go and observe 1 member teach a lesson. We always watch whole lessons because we believe it's much more respectful of teachers and of the teaching learning process to watch whole lessons. Everyone then codes the lesson on the 18 elements of the QT model using the 1 to 5 coding system. And it's really important that the teacher who taught the lesson also codes themselves as part of this process. So it's not just us giving you feedback, it's us using the chance to be in each other's classrooms to talk about our pedagogy. And that happens in the last part of the day, where teachers come together and have an extended discussion, not just of that lesson, but of teaching more broadly using the QT model. And what we find is that those conversations go well beyond the actual lesson. During that discussion, teachers try to come to consensus about the best code. Is it a 1? Is it a 4? Does it matter? What would it take to get to a 5, for example? And so those conversations are really quite extended. And as I said, the numbers are a means to having very specific conversations about their teaching. Sam Sims and his colleagues in the United Kingdom recently did a systematic review of effective professional development. And what they concluded is that any effective PD needs to build teachers' knowledge, it needs to motivate them, it needs to develop their actual teaching practice, and it needs to then embed any changes in practice. And I'm not going to go into the detail of this, but what they go on to say is that if we don't embed change in practice, we can easily see people revert to old habits. And we know that a lot of professional development, people might try something for 5 minutes and then they go back to the way they used to do things. If we fail to change teachers' practice at all, there can be a knowing-doing gap where people might be inspired by something, but they don't really know how to do it. We can build knowledge and people might not see the point of it, so nothing else happens. We can motivate teachers and embed things in practice, but get it wrong. I think here of Howard Gardner's work on multiple intelligences that saw people all over the world labeling students as certain kinds of learners. That's a kind of misunderstanding and misapplication of the original knowledge. What we are looking for is professional development that has mechanisms in all 4 of these areas in order to be effective. And we would argue and have in this document that I've mentioned over here, we have argued that quality teaching rounds absolutely has features or mechanisms from each of those dimensions. So it really is highly effective professional development. Before 2018, these are the schools. Each dot here represents a school, including one little island school out here. Each dot represents a school that had engaged with us on quality teaching rounds workshops. In 2018, we had a $17 million grant from the Paul Ramsay Foundation, which is a really big philanthropic organisation in Australia. And during that project, we grew to 1,400 schools. And you can see them mostly along the east coast of Australia with a smattering elsewhere. Since then, we've actually grown to pick up some more schools in Tasmania, Northern Territory and Western Australia, including some quite remote areas. So what we've demonstrated here is that we can scale effective professional development so that it's not simply reliant on the presenter or the provider of the professional development. We estimate that this work is now, that we have worked with 6,000 teachers, and they have worked with nearly 1 million students since we started this work. What we hear, I've just got a few quotes here from teachers. So this is a beginning teacher who says, you know, for how you think about your teaching, especially as a beginning teacher, confidence is such a big thing. And developing your relationships with other teachers, developing your pedagogical skills and your practice and your understanding of what quality teaching is. So having opportunities to apply the model and analyse it and really understand it has improved my overall teaching practice. We also hear from more experienced teachers, such as Jasmine, you know, that they're working with people from different faculties when they do quality teaching rounds or different parts of the school in a primary school. We hadn't worked together in that capacity before. We'd known each other for a long time and been on the same staff, but we actually hadn't had much working in interaction. So this was really positive and collegial and respectful, which she says is perfect. In terms of this next quote here, I think we're hearing from a principal who says the experienced teachers learned something from the newer teachers, and then the new teachers learned from the experience. So it really helps with that cross-generational learning. As teachers, we don't always get a lot of feedback. So for someone to watch you teach and say, that's really good, I'm going to try it in my classroom, there's a lot of good self-esteem building for our teachers as well. He goes on to say, these 4 teachers who were involved are still in conversation now. Being in a room all day and watching each other teach, there's a lot of trust that has to be built, and that's carried on. So it's a positive thing for us as a school. And finally, I just wanted to share this quote from Sharon Feynman-Nentzer. It's quite old now, but she says the first years of teaching influence not only whether people remain in teaching, but what kind of teacher they become. And it's really important that we develop teachers who are passionate about their work. She goes on to say, if we want schools to produce more powerful learning on the part of students, we have to offer more powerful learning opportunities to teachers. So what I want to do now is just share with you the impact that our research has had. With that $17 million from the Paul Ramsay Foundation, we conducted a program of research that involved 4 randomized controlled trials, if you like, the gold standard of research. We did longitudinal analysis, case studies, and school research partnerships where we were working on whole school change. We involved more than 1,400 teachers and 14,500 students from 430 schools across 3 different states in Australia. So this is a really massive data set and really rigorous research. And you can see here, you know, huge numbers of student tests, lesson observations, surveys, and interviews with students, teachers, and school leaders. And that reference there at the bottom provides our final report on that project that we've really reduced down to a very sort of simple to read approach. And just to give you a sense of what we did here, in 2019, we started our first randomized controlled trial with the New South Wales Department of Education. We wanted 200 schools. We only got 125. So we had to recruit more in the second year and then combine that as a split sample kind of design. In the second year, COVID happened, and we used that data to look at the impact of COVID, but we had to go back and recruit again in 2021 to get our kind of 200 schools across these 2 years. These were just primary schools. In 2021, we also started a fully online trial, so everything was done digitally. Teachers never had to come together. This was really important for us in terms of the remote schools and small schools that are dotted all over this country. Some schools don't even have 4 teachers, and so being able to work with people from other schools was really important. We had 28 secondary and primary schools in that randomised controlled trial. In 2021, we also started a trial with the Queensland Department of Education. Again, we didn't recruit enough schools. We had 58 in the first year, And so we picked up another 42 to have 100 schools in total in the second year. And that study was done independently. We didn't conduct that ourselves, another group did. Similarly, in 2022, we had the Victorian Department of Education conduct an independent trial in secondary schools. We were really interested in the impact on secondary students. Unfortunately, with only 40 schools, the trial was underpowered and we weren't able to produce any results from that particular study. We also followed 500 schools, just over, throughout the whole project. We did case studies in 12. And then in the last couple of years, we worked more closely, first with 10 schools in the Hunter region near where our university is, and then with 20 schools across the state, as well as some other projects that were going on at the same time. So what do we find out of all of that research? First of all, we found that teachers who do quality teaching rounds significantly, statistically significantly improved the quality of teaching they were delivering. We found that it improved teacher morale and efficacy significantly, which is, I guess, so important at the moment when we know teacher morale has been dampened by COVID and all of the after effects of that, including massive teacher shortages. It significantly improves student achievement by as much as 2 to 3 months between the end of term 1 and the end of the school year. So in 8 months, we're seeing 2 to 3 months additional growth for students whose teachers have done quality teaching rounds. And those effects were slightly stronger in disadvantaged settings, which is really important in terms of equity. What we found also in terms of student achievement is that those effects occurred in both maths and reading, which I guess are two of the higher stakes tests. Now, when I say, when I talk about this effect, I think one thing I want to draw attention to is that this is a very proximal measure of the professional development. The PD was not on teaching maths or on reading. The professional development was about pedagogy in general. And so to get this kind of effect of 2 to 3 months additional growth in maths and reading from professional development that was about pedagogy is actually quite remarkable. Of the 4 randomized controlled trials we did, we saw these kinds of effects in 3 of the trials. As I said, the Victorian trial was underpowered. We saw the effects for years 3, 4, and 5, 6. As I said, the Victorian study was wanting to look at year 8, but we just didn't get enough. We saw significant effects in 2 states. New South Wales had been working with the quality teaching model for 20 years. It was brand new in Queensland. So to see that effect in Queensland was also terrific. We saw significant effects in our face-to-face delivery mode, but also from our fully online quality teaching rounds digital form of professional development. That's really significant when you're trying to take something to scale, especially in communities where there's large distances. We also saw significant positive effects when I led the professional development, but also when I trained people who had come out of schools, our quality teaching rounds advisors, to lead the workshops. And as I said, one of the trials, the one in Queensland, was conducted by the Institute for Social Science Research at the University of Queensland. So the quality teaching rounds process is really very simple. We have 2 teachers attend a 2-day workshop. When I say 2, it's usually 2 minimum, and we usually recommend that 1 person who comes has some decision-making authority in the school. So 2 teachers come to a 2-day workshop, either online or face-to-face. That sets them up to go back to their school where they join with 2 other teachers to conduct a set of rounds, and each of the teachers takes their turn to teach. So over 4 days, they are addressing in every one of the rounds the quality teaching model. So really it's 3 dimensions of pedagogy. Yes, there are 18 elements, but really if you can be thinking about the intellectual quality learning environment and significance, we have evidence that it makes a significant difference. So really, this is one quite small initiative in terms of professional development. All the results I've talked about come from only 1 set of rounds, meaning each teacher takes their turn to host a lesson observation. That's it. 4 days of professional development producing those kinds of results. So it's one initiative with a broad impact on teachers, on the quality of teaching, and on student achievement. I just want to comment on the fact that quality teaching is a systemic approach. It treats, it's not just looking narrowly, it's thinking about the whole system of education. The model treats teaching as complex work, recognizing that contexts will change, that people have different experiences and so on. But what it does, I think, very successfully is it distills the essence down to these 3 big ideas. And those ideas resonate with teachers. They're not difficult to implement, and they can make a really significant improvement. The professional development builds on what teachers already know and do, but it quickly builds their capacity. We know from a lot of work on professional learning communities, Pam Grossman in the United States a few years back wrote that it takes at least 18 months for a professional learning community to reach maturity. Well, our teachers do it almost instantly because of the mechanisms that we've set up within the quality teaching rounds approach. So it really quickly starts to change their practice in small ways, and those ways are unforgettable. We've gone back to schools 6 months later, and the quality of teaching is still high, if not even higher than when we finish the project. We also have developed through this big program of work a quality teaching academy. This is a not-for-profit social enterprise that really is designed to support teachers and school leaders to do it for themselves. So we're as I said, not-for-profit organisation. We're really just trying to make a difference for teachers and students and school leaders. So in terms of thinking comprehensively, we absolutely in this work are building in notions of scalability. We can't have an approach to professional development that's dependent on the great presenter. It needs to be something that others can lead. And so having our advisors lead the workshops, having workshops that require 2 days of time from 2 teachers per school, and having that available online really contributes to the scalability. The other thing that really helps is that any 4 teachers can come together to do this work. It's about pedagogy, not curriculum. I know you're a curriculum-focused group, but in terms of the pedagogy, as a former physical education teacher, I can watch a senior maths lesson or a kindergarten lesson or an art lesson and interestingly still comment very meaningfully on the pedagogy because of the detail that we provide underneath the 18 elements of the quality teaching model. We're also very much interested in sustainability, and that's why we are really attempting to empower teachers to do this work for themselves. If it was dependent on a team of academics visiting a school once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, it would be impossible to sustain this. We've found that we basically share with the teachers who come to the workshops everything they need to know to run the initiative in their school and slowly roll it out. What we find in some schools is that they begin with just 4 teachers. And once they've had a go, then they pick up some other colleagues. That's a really fabulous way to get this happening and to sustain the initiative. We also very much are concerned about robust evidence. There's a lot of stuff out there in the wider world that goes viral that has very poor quality evidence behind it. And I would argue right now that quality teaching rounds, our approach to professional development, has been tested more than any other professional development approach in the world in terms of rigorous, robust evidence production. I think that's really important. And I think most importantly, we have to think about the costs of inaction. If we don't address the current problems that we face in the education world, we actually doom generations of young people to poorer quality education. And that has such massive consequences for their lives. And so providing powerful professional development is really critical. And that's why I guess I just want to leave my talk with a quote from one of Foucault's students who said, "We have a responsibility with regard to the way we exercise power. We must not lose the idea that we could exercise it differently." And so if nothing else, I do hope that this talk has given you some ideas for how you might exercise your own power differently. There's some contact details if you would like to reach out to us, and I'm going to stop sharing and be very interested in any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Professor Gore. OK， 我简单稍微中文再译一下，因为其实我们有翻译那个中文。那我刚刚在听里面，其实我额外长出一些Jennifer Gore share 他们的一些经验。那他刚刚其实是有讲说，他们这个 model 其实是在发展大概有20年以上的，然后原本是从那个 authentic pedagogy， 那这个所谓的 authentic， 我的理解是，其实就是说在教育里面，就是说学生兴趣也很重要，可是学生的那个 intellectual development 也很重要，学生的情绪的发展，其他就是都很重要。那就是说要取得一个 balance， 所以教学其实它是非常的 comprehensive， 非常的复杂的工作。所以呢，他们在老师的这个专业发展里面，就是说也发现，其实老师之间的关系很重要。其实刚君毅老师在前面已经分享到，我们在带工作坊的过程看到老师，其实那个关系，譬如说 positive 非常正面的，然后有信赖的这种关系很重要。所以他们说他们在训练，他并不认为是train the trainer。就是它应该是一个共同学习的过程。那他们学习的过程其实很像我们的观益课公备社群，对不对？那他刚刚有提到，就是说就是他们倒不认为他为什么不用 PLC 那个概念是他们觉得并不是要统治，反倒是要学习。所以大家刚刚可能可以看得到他的那个 Quality Teaching Round 的设计里面，他第一个先阅读，就是说阅读里面做一个 knowledge base。然后他们在观课的过程，我觉得他可能跟台湾稍微有点不太一样。到时候我们去，我们可以多一点了解。那因为我们也会办读书会哈，就是有一个 coding 的 system， 协助老师，好，你怎么看？那当然他们也是有一些阅读的基础，然后呢会有一些 discussion 是based on 他们观察，而这个观察是 based on 那个 coding system， 好，那。在这个model 里面呢，就是他刚刚其实一直强调，就是老师之间的关系的这个重要。然后他有提到他们主要的发现，我简单提几个，就是他有提到，因为他们澳洲其实场域非常的广，然后有一些地方其实要争老师也不太容易。那他说他这个 model 其实他们有一个很重要，就是我们不只 respect 老师，我们要让老师的这个morale， 就是那个叫什么士气提升，那老师更会觉得他这个工作的那个价值，所以其实也会影响到整个就是说教师的生态。那还有一个他们也非常重视 student achievement。其实这也是所有我们家长一定都关心，教育一定都关心的哈，所以他们是做了一个很好的 balance， 让这个就重视老师重视学生的部分，就大家所关心的，他们一直把它能够带起来，然后他提供了很多他的 data set， 就是好多年的那个研究哈，作为一个证据跟支持。那第三个，他有一个发现我印象非常深刻，因为 Professor Gore 其实也有建议我们说参访的学校，因为他们带的，你刚刚有看他那个扩散，就是逐渐扩散非常大的领域。那其中他们觉得很骄傲的是，他们帮助那些 disadvantage 的学校还有学生。那他觉得这个 model 其实在那个部分的效能特别强。好，所以他也有建议我们说，他们带起来，他们觉得很不错的学校带我们去参访这样子。然后我蛮喜欢他后面有提到，就是教学是一个非常非常复杂的工作。我要 真的哎，因为在跟大家的因为我跟曾老师还有俊逸老师，其实我们都在课程与教学研究所，我们的确觉得课程跟教学不是一件很容易的事，其实它非常非常复杂。那怎么借由这个我们所做的工作非常复杂的过程里面去提炼这个 essence， 这也是他们在研究的那个过程。OK， 好，我大概做了简单的摘要。I already summarized. We still got 5 minutes. If anyone have a feedback or question, you can raise your hand.
I'm very interested in this project or this workshop because this is the first time I heard this the how can I say the contact of this QTR, yes. I have a question because we also have this kind of observation and this kind of some activity in Taiwanese education field. Like in the school, we sometimes have some. We could join some co-planning team. So many teachers stay together and we see how the other teacher teaching. We also have this kind of, and we give some advice and we also discuss about this. So I feel this is a bit different. The QTR is a bit different from what we have done in Taiwan. So I'm wondering if there is a coach. You just told us because people go to a workshop, maybe some online workshop, and then go back to school, and they do a bit like observation and teaching and discussion. So how do they know they have done well about this? How do they know this? Because I don't know anything about this. This is the first time, and I'm very interested in this. So how do people know, how do teachers know they are going to a good direction or correct direction for this? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think the difference between this approach and many other approaches is that we have the quality teaching model, and it is elaborated and specified at a great level of detail. So often we rely on coaches who are more knowledgeable to help people understand the direction they're going in and whether it's correct or not. That's not our starting position. Other research that we've published shows that the quality of teaching delivered by experienced teachers is the same as that delivered by beginning teachers when you use the quality teaching model to look at the quality, the intellectual quality, quality learning environment, and significance of lessons. So we assume that experience makes a difference. And what we found is that, in fact, the quality of teaching is the same. And I think one of the reasons for that is that most professional development doesn't address pedagogy. It addresses curriculum, assessment, reporting, bullying, technology, but not pedagogy. We kind of take pedagogy for granted. By having the quality teaching model specified in the way it does with the 1 to 5 coding scale for each of the 18 elements, you don't need a coach. What you do is you have a group of 4 teachers who come together to describe each other's practice using the quality teaching model. The normative decision, and I'm making the distinction here between description, what is happening, and what ought to happen. The normative decision about what ought to happen is left to the group of 4 teachers. And because we have mixed groups of teachers, we find that it's very obvious how they're going and what they might do differently. And as I say, it's not a simple matter of using the numbers, because the numbers have to take into account the context of the specific lesson. But what the numbers do is they enable a level of specificity that doesn't require the expert or the facilitator or the coach. And it's really very interesting when we get groups of 4 teachers to start talking, because each person takes their turn to share. I coded deep knowledge of 4 for this reason. I coded it a 2, before they try to come to agreement about the best code for every element. And what we also do is each person takes their turn to introduce the different elements. So it's not the same person who speaks first every time. It's incredibly, if you like, democratizing or empowering of teachers. And I'm always amazed at how quickly and animatedly teachers talk, because of the guidance that's provided by the classroom practice guide, which sits with the quality teaching model. And we say it does the heavy lifting of facilitation. If anything, we find teachers often code themselves more harshly, and their colleagues say, no, it wasn't a 2, it was at least a 3 for these reasons. And that's, again, what teachers find very affirming. So I don't know if I've explained that well enough, but that's at least a partial answer. And thanks again for the question.
我刚刚听起来就是说他们的 model， 因为他刚刚有提到，就是说他们希望是一致的，然后他有提到，因为教学是一件非常非常复杂的工作，所以经验其实很重要。他们倒不认为就是一定要有一个 coach for facilitate， 然后老师藉由在经验过程里面相互的讨论，然后提醒。我觉得这个也是我跟俊逸老师还有曾老师过去这么多年在特别曾老师在很多年在陪伴大家的过程，其实也是我们看到的，就是那个协作跟学习的重要，在一个非常非常民主的平等的社会里面，大家相互的提醒的那个过程，我觉得这是跟我们稍微好像并不是要复制一个 model， 可是是学习的成长这样子，这大概是他刚那个简单的分享，我觉得是非常好的问题。And thank you so much for Professor Gore's presentation. Actually, we learned a lot, and we still have a need to learn furtherly. So maybe next the end of the year, when we come to Australia, maybe we have a more experience to exchange with you, because we also have the model we call lesson study from Japan. And your model is very interesting, intriguing. So maybe next time we can bring a lot of experience and questions and to exchange with you and your colleagues. Okay.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, all the best. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you. See you next time. Okay. 好，希望下次我们到澳洲去的时候，就是大家可以，因为我们的那个出国参访，我们也会帮大家就是一起来，我们来办读书会这样子，好，然后我们一起共同学习。所以我们今天主题是协作与学习。那大家会发现，我刚忘了跟他说，因为我有跟他说我们那个组织的名字，所以他以为我们是叫 curriculum group。其实我们还包括 pedagogy， 对不对？没关系，我们下次跟他厘清。对，好，那很谢谢大家，这个场次我们就在这里先结束，好，谢谢。